think it's lust, that pull in the chest, the tightness in the stomach, the restless scrolling, the impulse to message someone, anyone, just to feel something. Feels urgent, feels real. It convinces the mind that connection is only a kiss, a touch, a night away. But that ache, it isn't really about the body. It's emptiness wearing perfume, hoping no one notices the loneliness underneath. Lust is loud. It shouts. It demands. It flashes in images, fantasies, and fast-moving desires. It offers distraction but not satisfaction. Emptiness, on the other hand, is silent. It whispers between thoughts. It hums behind the laughter. It's the quiet hollowness that creeps in when the noise fades and the night is still. Yet, because the body is louder than the soul, many reach for lust thinking it will heal a wound that lust never even touches. According to Carl Jung, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. That's exactly what this is. Not desire, not hunger, but avoidance. A desperate attempt to outrun the aching silence of unmet needs and unhealed stories. Lust becomes a convenient mask, because to admit emptiness is to admit something is missing. And many would rather be consumed by fire than sit in the cold with their truth. So the mind looks for heat in someone else's eyes, in a flirtation, in the idea of being wanted. Being wanted feels like being worthy, even if just for a moment. But here's the truth that hurts and heals at the same time. What's being chased isn't a body, but a feeling. The feeling of being chosen, of being enough, of not having to face the question, why do I feel so hollow inside? The world doesn't help. Culture sells lust like medicine. Every advertisement, every music video, every influencer with just the right amount of vulnerability and sex appeal teaches that pleasure is the cure for pain. That more intimacy will fix what abandonment broke. That if someone desires the body, they'll eventually care for the soul. But that's not how this works. Lust fills the bed, not the heart. And when morning comes, the heart is often emptier than before, because it remembers what it really wanted and didn't get. There's a moment, after the chase, after the climax, after the scroll, when everything stops, just for a second. That's when the truth slips in. That's when it hits. This isn't working. I'm still lonely. But instead of facing that moment, most run back to another body, another conversation, another surge of dopamine, because stopping means feeling, and feeling means remembering, and remembering means confronting the wounds that started this whole thing. But emptiness, when honored, doesn't destroy. It reveals, points to what's missing. Maybe it's love that was never modeled. Maybe it's touch that was never safe. Maybe it's a father's absence or a mother's coldness. Whatever it is, lust can't fix it. It wasn't built to. Lust is a spark. Healing is a slow fire. One excites, the other transforms. This is why so many keep spiraling. Not because they're weak, but because they're human. Because somewhere along the way, the heart learned to reach for what was immediate instead of what was meaningful. But that can change. Not by shaming desire, because desire is not the enemy, but by understanding what that desire is truly asking for. Maybe it's not craving touch. Maybe it's craving comfort. Maybe it's not asking for a partner. Maybe it's asking for peace. Carl Jung also said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That restless energy, that insatiable pull, that constant seeking, it's not fate. It's a signal that it's time to look deeper, to stop numbing and start listening, to stop chasing and start healing. Because lust screams, but emptiness waits. It waits for someone to get quiet enough to hear it, to stop calling it names like desire and need, and start calling it what it really is. A part of the self that's been starved for too long, starved of meaning, starved of connection, starved of being seen without having to perform for it. There's nothing wrong with wanting closeness. That's human. But closeness that's used as a shield from the self will never satisfy. It will always lead to more searching, more confusion, more emotional hangovers disguised as heartbreak. And so the work begins not in resisting desire, but in questioning it. Not in suppressing longing, but in translating it. What is this really about? What is being hoped for? What is the soul actually asking? It's not about guilt or shame. It's about honesty, radical honesty, the kind that doesn't run when it feels uncomfortable. The kind that says, this isn't about them. This is about something missing in here. And in that moment, something powerful begins to shift. Because when the source of the emptiness is named, it can be healed, not with lust, but with truth, with attention, with love, the kind that doesn't ask to be earned, just seen. It's so easy to confuse intensity with connection. The butterflies, the late-night texts, the magnetism that seems to pull two bodies together as if the universe itself arranged it. Feels real, feels right, and when someone finally looks back with that same spark, when desire collides with desire, it creates a surge so powerful it convinces the heart. This must be love. But that's where the illusion begins. Because intensity is deceptive. It mimics connection so well that many stop questioning it. But genuine connection doesn't burn that hot, that fast. It doesn't consume, it anchors. It grows quietly, slowly, like roots beneath the surface. Not fireworks, but steady warmth. Not chaos, but calm. Yet most have been taught to chase the drama, not the depth. And so the cycle continues. Find someone who ignites that fire, dive in, confuse passion for purpose, and then wonder why the emptiness returns. Intensity is seductive because it offers an escape. For a moment, it silences the noise within. It becomes a high, one that masks insecurity, numbs old wounds, and temporarily makes a person feel wanted, even if only as a projection of someone else's fantasy. But connection, real connection, doesn't use people as bandages. It sees them as whole even with their scars, even in silence, especially in stillness. So much of modern love has been built on speed. Swipe right, match, text, meet, repeat. But the soul doesn't move at that pace. It doesn't care about algorithms or instant chemistry. It yearns for something slower, deeper, something built on emotional presence, not adrenaline. Yet when most have been conditioned to chase the rush, anything stable feels boring. Anything safe feels distant. That's the tragedy. Calm is misread as disinterest, and drama is mistaken for depth. As Carl Jung once said, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. True connection transforms. It changes the way someone breathes, the way they see the world, the way they treat themselves. But intensity often leaves no room for that. It demands, consumes, exhausts. It may cause a reaction, but rarely a transformation. Because in intensity, the focus is usually on possession, not understanding. There's a reason the same pattern repeats. The attraction is undeniable. The beginning feels electric, but soon enough, reality settles in. The conversations grow shallow. The vulnerability fades. And suddenly, it becomes clear. This wasn't about building something, it was about escaping something. The relationship, if it can even be called that, was built on borrowed energy, on hormones and hope, on fear disguised as longing. Many keep chasing that intensity, believing that if it's not overwhelming, it's not worth it. But that belief is a trap, a trauma echo, a reflection of early experiences where love was inconsistent, where attention had to be earned, where safety felt foreign. So when someone calm walks in, someone who doesn't create chaos, it feels unfamiliar, and unfamiliar gets labeled as not enough. But it is enough. It's more than enough. It's what healing looks like. It just doesn't look the way movies taught us it would. Lust can masquerade as connection when someone's starving for validation. That touch, that eye contact, that fleeting moment of being seen. It fills the void for a heartbeat. But connection requires more than being seen in a moment. It asks to be known over time, not just in the good moods, but in the silence. Not just in the physical closeness, but in the emotional distance, too. Can someone stay when the mask slips? That's the question intensity never answers. Connection has rhythm. It moves like a tide, not always fast, not always loud, but steady. It makes space for questions, for fears, for truth. And most importantly, it invites authenticity. But that kind of bond can't happen when someone's still chasing the next emotional high. Can't grow in soil watered by fear and adrenaline. It needs honesty, presence, time. There's something sacred about being met by another soul who isn't trying to impress or overwhelm. Someone who listens without fixing, who sits without rushing. That is where connection begins. In the spaces between words. In the comfort of being understood, not just desired. And that can never be manufactured by intensity alone. So many are exhausted, not because love is hard, but because false connection is. The constant performing, the endless guessing, the tightrope of trying to be enough while never feeling enough. But there's another way, a quieter path, one where love doesn't feel like a storm, but like coming home. Where it's not about proving worth, but about sharing existence. Connection doesn't rush. It doesn't demand a climax. It doesn't need to be dazzling. What it needs is truth, and the courage to choose someone who feels like peace, even if the world says excitement is more important. Because peace is where the real relationship begins. Not with a spark, but with a steady flame that says, stay. This is safe. This is real. Everywhere you look, the message is the same. Feel good now, fix nothing later. Quick pleasure has become the currency of modern life. Swipe, scroll, click, repeat. Bodies are marketed like brands, and emotions are flattened into emojis. The culture isn't just saturated with lust, it's structured around it. The more distracted people become, the easier they are to sell to control, to numb. So it's no surprise that so many end up mistaking lust for something meaningful. Not because they're weak, but because the system they're living in is designed to confuse them. It starts young. Music, movies, and media teach that attraction is everything, that being desired is the highest form of worth. Even pain becomes romanticized if it's wrapped in a beautiful body. Over time, attention becomes addictive, and physical validation is mistaken for intimacy. Suddenly, it's not about connection anymore. It's about visibility. The goal becomes being seen, even if not truly known. And slowly, the soul is trained to equate value with sexual appeal. But underneath that constant stimulation, there's an emotional silence growing louder. Because no amount of likes, matches, or late-night messages can replace what's missing: real human presence, real connection, real being. The kind that doesn't vanish when the battery dies or when desire fades. But society doesn't teach how to sit with discomfort. It teaches how to distract from it. With dopamine, with noise, with lust dressed up as liberation. As Carl Jung once said, people grow like plants, slowly and in silence. But growth doesn't trend. Silence doesn't sell. Stillness doesn't keep people scrolling. So instead of encouraging depth, the world rewards overstimulation. Instead of teaching emotional literacy, it packages avoidance in the form of curated images and empty affirmations. Lust becomes a placeholder for love because it's quicker, easier, and doesn't ask for vulnerability. But behind every compulsive craving, there's usually a deeper question. What is this trying to cover up? For many, the answer is emptiness, a kind of emotional hunger that can't be fed through physical means. It's the need to be seen without needing to perform. The need to matter without having to impress. And when that hunger is met with the fast food of modern lust, it may feel full for a moment, but the crash always comes. The problem isn't desire. Desire is human. The problem is being taught to pour desire into bottomless cups. Into people who aren't capable of holding space, into moments that don't offer meaning. It's the difference between being touched and being felt, between being wanted and being valued. And most never pause long enough to recognize the difference, because the culture keeps them moving. Faster, louder, emptier. Digital intimacy, though convenient, often deepens the void. The conversations are quick. The connections are shallow. And the more available people become online, the less accessible they seem in real life. It's a strange paradox. More connection tools than ever, but lonelier hearts than ever recorded. Because what people really crave isn't just contact. It's resonance. And no algorithm can code that. According to Carl Jung, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But who gets that chance when identity is being outsourced to trends and profiles? Who has the courage to explore their inner world when the outer one is screaming for attention? Becoming who you truly are takes silence, honesty, and courage. And in a culture obsessed with surface, courage looks like slowness, like turning down the volume and sitting with the question, what am I really seeking? Most aren't addicted to lust. They're addicted to the feeling of being momentarily important. Lust offers that, a temporary suspension of emptiness, a quick escape from the weight of loneliness. But it's not real. And deep down, most know it. That's why it doesn't last. That's why the thrill wears off faster every time. Because the soul doesn't want more noise. It wants to be held in silence. It doesn't want to be chased. It wants to be understood. There's no shame in having chased the wrong thing. The system was rigged for that. What matters now is seeing through the illusion. The kind of courage it takes to disconnect from the constant stream of stimulation and begin reconnecting with what's real. That is a rare and sacred act. to stop chasing lust and start listening to what the emptiness is trying to say. That's where transformation begins. So when the urge returns, when the craving to be touched, seen, or chosen arises, the question must shift from who can give this to why is this being needed in the first place. Not to deny the desire, but to understand it. Because only through understanding does freedom begin. And only through silence does healing speak. What's often labeled as lust is, more often than not, a signal of something much deeper, a hunger not of the body, but of the soul. Beneath that physical craving, beneath the longing eyes, the impulsive messages, the fantasies that spiral late at night, there's a question that hasn't been answered. Am I enough without being wanted? For many, the body becomes the battlefield where loneliness fights for attention, where pain wears perfume and tries to pass for passion. But at the heart of it all, what's truly being craved isn't pleasure. This meaning. So many walk around carrying the invisible weight of unmet emotional needs. Childhood memories tucked beneath the skin. The quiet ache of not being held when it mattered most. The echo of a father who never said, "I see you," or a mother whose love had strings attached. And over time, that emptiness starts to speak. Not with words, but with patterns. With attractions to people who don't stay. With compulsions disguised as desire. With the pursuit of bodies when what's really being searched for is belonging. As Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That's exactly what happens. People find themselves drawn again and again to the same types, the same pain dressed in different clothes. Not because they want to suffer, but because the soul is trying to resolve something, trying to rewrite the story, trying to find, in a stranger's arms, what was missing long before the first kiss ever happened. But lust can't rewrite the story, can only offer a brief pause from it, a moment where the ache is numbed, not healed, a moment where someone feels alive, even if they know it won't last. And when that moment fades, when the clothes are back on, when the lights are off, when it's just one person staring at a screen or ceiling, the emptiness returns, louder than before, because it was never about sex. It was about being seen. It was about being chosen. It was about being enough without having to perform for it. The tragedy is that so many are told to chase more intensity when what they truly need is safety. Lust offers fire, but what the soul often needs is water, a place to rest, a space to be. But those who grew up never feeling emotionally safe will often confuse chaos with love and silence with rejection. So when something calm and steady comes along, it feels foreign. It doesn't match the blueprint burned into their nervous system. And without even realizing it, they turn away from what could heal them and run back toward what keeps them wounded. There is a deep wisdom in the body. It remembers everything, not just touch, but absence. Not just words spoken, but the ones withheld. And when those memories go unexamined, the body starts searching for relief in places it can't find it. The craving becomes louder. The chase becomes addictive, not because of lust itself, but because of the emptiness it's covering up. The soul isn't looking for fireworks. It's looking for home, a place where the masks can drop, a presence that doesn't demand perfection, an intimacy that doesn't end the moment vulnerability shows up. But finding that kind of connection requires pausing long enough to ask, what is this desire really about? Because lust says, touch me, but emptiness says, see me, stay with me, Tell me I matter even when I'm not performing. Carl Jung believed that every form of addiction is an unconscious substitute for genuine spiritual connection. And lust, when compulsive, becomes just that, a way of reaching for God in the form of flesh, a way of escaping despair by grasping for beauty. But the body is not a savior, and pleasure is not a cure. They are beautiful things, sacred even, but when used to fill a spiritual void, they become idols that always demand more and give less. True healing begins when the chase stops, not because desire disappears, but because the one doing the desiring finally turns inward and listens. Listens to the voice beneath the craving, the one that says, I miss being held without conditions. I miss being safe. I miss being known. That voice deserves to be heard, not silenced by another rush of dopamine or another one-night connection. What the soul longs for cannot be bought, scrolled to, or seduced. It must be built, slowly, patiently, through inner work, through honest reflection, through relationships rooted in truth, not fantasy. The emptiness isn't a flaw, it's a compass. It points toward what's missing, not to shame, but to guide. It asks not for judgment, but for attention, because the answer was never in another body. It was in the questions never asked, the pain never named, the love never received. And once those are faced, lust no longer needs to carry a burden it was never meant to hold. Lust always promises more than it delivers. In the moment, it feels like everything, the attention, the closeness, the thrill of being wanted. There's a kind of high in that pursuit, like all the emptiness might finally be silenced just by being desired deeply enough, just by being touched long enough, just by being chosen this time. But the truth reveals itself not during the rise. It reveals itself in the fall, in the quiet that follows, in the emptiness that lingers when the moment ends. It's always in the aftermath that the truth shows its face. After the texts fade, after the door closes, after the rush dies down and there's nothing left to distract the mind. That's when the silence speaks. That's when the body doesn't feel alive anymore. It just feels used. That's when the soul realizes it wasn't fed, only stimulated. That's when the crash hits. Because if it were really lust, clean, honest desire, it would leave the spirit at peace. But it doesn't. It leaves the heart hollow and the mind spinning. The pattern becomes familiar. Starts with excitement, then indulgence, and then the crash. Regret, loneliness, a strange sense of detachment from oneself. As if the experience created distance, not closeness. As if the soul whispered, this wasn't it. But the body wasn't ready to hear. Over time, the repetition becomes a cycle, craving, consuming, crashing again and again. Each time hoping for more, but receiving less. Carl Jung once said, we cannot change anything until we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses. And this cycle of false fulfillment isn't about shame or guilt. It's about awareness. Because if the pattern is never faced, it will continue to operate in the background, sabotaging real intimacy and replacing depth with dopamine. Lust is not the enemy. Denial is. The denial of what's really being pursued underneath the surface. There's nothing wrong with wanting closeness, with craving intimacy. Those are human needs. But when those needs are buried under years of emotional neglect, trauma, or self-abandonment, they show up distorted. Lust becomes a translator for unspoken pain. It says, come closer, when what it really means is, please see me, Please make me feel like I'm enough. But bodies can't carry what hearts haven't processed. No amount of sex, flirting, or attention can heal what someone refuses to acknowledge. And it's not weakness, it's survival. Many were never taught how to sit with longing, never given the emotional vocabulary to say, "This is emptiness, not desire." So the chase becomes a form of medicine. But it's the wrong prescription. It numbs for a moment, only to deepen the pain later. Because there is no shortcut to healing, no fast track to meaning, only truth and the willingness to sit with it. The body might scream for pleasure, but the soul quietly asks for something else. To be known, to be safe, to be accepted in its rawest form. That kind of fulfillment doesn't come quickly. It doesn't come with a match, a fling, or a fantasy. It comes from choosing a different path. One that doesn't chase the high but embraces the work. The work of asking, why am I doing this again? What am I running from? What am I hoping to feel that I can't seem to find on my own? The aftermath isn't just uncomfortable. It's instructive. It's where the deeper lessons live. If there's a pattern of feeling empty after being intimate, that's not a coincidence. That's a message. The emptiness is the body's way of telling the truth. That this wasn't connection. That this wasn't enough. That this wasn't love. And sometimes the only way to hear the truth is to let the noise die down and stop pretending the crash is just a phase. Carl Jung also said, "Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." The aftermath is where awakening can begin, not because it feels good, but because it forces reflection. It demands honesty. It calls for the courage to stop blaming the other person and start looking inward. Not to punish, but to understand. The pain after lust that wasn't rooted in love or truth isn't a failure. It's feedback. It's the soul reminding the heart that it deserves more than a temporary escape. That it wasn't made for constant consumption but for deep communion. That it's tired of the chase. Tired of settling for sparks when what it really longs for is fire. Steady, warm, and real. And once that truth is fully felt, not pushed away, not drowned out, but welcomed, something inside begins to shift. The need for lust begins to fade, not because desire disappears, but because the soul is finally being heard. The crash becomes a turning point. The aftermath becomes the teacher, and the journey back to wholeness begins. Slowly, honestly, deeply. Not in the arms of someone else, but in the willingness to finally come home to oneself. Healing begins with honesty. Not the kind that's easy to speak, but the kind that's hard to face. The kind that comes when the noise dies down and there's no one left to impress. No desire left to chase. That's where the truth begins to rise. Not the polished truth dressed in excuses, but the raw truth, the one that whispers in the dark. This isn't about lust. This is about not knowing how to sit with yourself. Lust is convenient. It offers a shortcut, a way to feel alive without doing the work of actually being alive. A way to feel wanted without asking whether one feels worthy. But when everything is stripped away, when the rush fades and silence returns, what's left is a mirror. And that mirror doesn't lie. It shows what's really going on beneath the surface. Not craving, not hunger, emptiness. And that emptiness can only be healed with radical self-honesty. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." And that's exactly what happens. People run into arms that don't hold them, chase eyes that don't see them, and crave bodies that only remind them they're still alone afterward. Not because they're broken, but because they've never been taught how to turn inward without fear. Because facing the self can feel more terrifying than losing it. So the question has to change. Not who can make this feeling go away, but what is this feeling trying to say? Behind the impulse, behind the fantasy, behind the sudden desire to reach out to someone who was never truly safe, there is a message. One that says, there's something unhealed in here, and that something doesn't need more distraction. It needs attention. It needs space. It needs truth. Self-honesty isn't about shame. It's not about labeling lust as wrong or desire as dangerous. It's about recognizing when desire is not about someone else at all. When it's actually a scream from within, a signal from a part of the self that was never heard, never valued, never soothed. Lust, in this case, isn't sin. It's a signal, a flare fired from the soul to say, there's something you're not facing. Many chase pleasure because pain feels unbearable in solitude. But solitude isn't the enemy. Silence is not punishment. It's invitation, a space to finally listen, a place where the surface gets peeled back and the real questions emerge. Why is touch needed to feel valuable? Why is validation being traded for intimacy? Why is discomfort met with escape instead of care? The culture doesn't make this easy. Everything is built to pull focus outward. Click here. Watch this. Buy that. Lust isn't just allowed. It's encouraged. It's monetized. But no one profits off healing. No one gets rich from someone who finds peace within themselves. So, distraction becomes the drug of choice, and honesty is delayed again and again until the soul becomes a stranger. But the soul never stops speaking. It waits, patiently, painfully. It waits for the day when someone becomes brave enough to stop running and start listening. That kind of bravery isn't loud. It doesn't look like power. It looks like someone sitting alone in a quiet room, choosing not to text the person who hurt them, choosing not to scroll, not to seduce, not to chase, just to sit and feel. That is the beginning of healing. According to Carl Jung, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. That is where the deepest transformation begins. Not in fixing the behavior, but in understanding the wound that created it. In tracing the pattern back to its origin. In finding the first moment when connection was confused with performance. When being loved started to feel like something that had to be earned through attention, seduction, or sacrifice. To heal, there must be a willingness to face the pain directly. To ask the hard questions and sit with the real answers. Not to judge them, but to free them. Because that buried part, the one that keeps reaching for the wrong people, the wrong patterns, it's not evil. It's just scared. It's tired. And it's been trying to get noticed for years. Radical self-honesty means no longer blaming others for the crash that follows the chase. It means recognizing where power was handed over, where emptiness was fed with fantasy instead of care. It's not about regret. It's about awakening. It's about seeing that healing was never going to come from another person's body, but from one's own willingness to reconnect with their soul. There is nothing more powerful than someone who knows what they're truly craving and refuses to settle for substitutes. Someone who chooses to stop performing and starts being. Who doesn't just want to be touched, but to be known. And who, finally, is ready to know themselves, not just the polished parts, but the broken, beautiful truth of their whole being.